A friend in the US sent me this week a Republican member of Congress has tabled a bill. It sounds a bit like a backbench bill, but I think it's a warning signal. This is about the US withdrawing from Nato. And I mean, clearly there is political interest and support for that.
Now, we're going to discuss now for the next few minutes. The race is on to secure peace in Ukraine by Christmas. Leaders are meeting in Paris tomorrow for the latest round of peace talks. Keir Starmer is trying to get the agreement today in Downing Street from the Belgian Prime Minister on using frozen Russian assets to help Ukraine. But the real concern in all of this is fears that the US is losing interest. And the head of NATO isn't cooling temperatures by talking about being ready for a world war. So do we need to, Nicky, prepare for life without the US by our sides? Or is this just a blip under Donald Trump and actually the Europeans shouldn't be moving too far?
Well, I certainly think the Europeans, no one should rush into anything, but I think US isolationism is not new, and there have been plenty of examples, in the 20th century where there has been, quite a lot of feeling in the US that they shouldn't be the world's policeman, that they shouldn't get involved in other conflicts. I mean, as we know, ultimately that doesn't ever completely hold. But I did notice a friend in the US sent me this week a Republican member of Congress has tabled a bill. It sounds a bit like a backbench bill, but I think it's a warning signal. This is about the US withdrawing from Nato. And I mean, clearly there is political interest and support for that. And so, I think for the first time, probably, certainly in my lifetime, and I suspect many people listening, I think we have got to think about what would happen if the US were not to be a formal sort of, military support in Europe. I mean, there'll be plenty of intelligence sharing that will continue and everything else, but I think it could look very different, and that is a whole new world of uncertainty.
And a world that we've not budgeted for, have we?
Absolutely.
In any way, shape or form.
No, definitely not. And that's the key thing that needs to change, is we need to scale up our expenditure, scale up our defences, scale up our preparation, scale up our mentality, really, because anything could now be possible. And I think we also need to think about this in a wider sense than just Europe. There are people in the coalition, other countries in the coalition that are willing. I believe Japan and South Korea, for example, both very much on board. And there are countries in the Middle East, for example, that are very strongly in support of Ukraine rather than and worried about Russia, even there. And so I think building an international coalition that has a commitment to values and sovereignty and so on is really important, and having the hardware to back that up is essential too. But I do think the two things have to go hand in hand. I think as we build up our hard power, we need to be very careful not to draw down our soft power, because I think winning the battle of ideas internationally is going to be just as important as being able to stand in the face of Russia and put them off any idea that they might come further than they've already come.
And yet, how much was in the budget about defence spending?
Not enough.
Not enough. But then how much do we really as a country, I don't know about the debate in Europe, but how much do we really, any of us, think this is going to happen, in the sense that, is it conversations? I talk to friends. I'm involved in something called the Armed Forces Parliamentary Scheme, which lots of our colleagues do. It's brilliant, just attached to 3 services. And we were having this debate, which is actually the public are not in any way talking about this, prepared for it, thinking about what the implications might be. And in some ways that's good, in the sense that people are getting on with their lives. But equally, if we are about to suddenly see government spending really have to change, the focus have to change of ministers. I mean, I think the thing in the Times today, all routine business of governments been put on hold. That we're going to have to get used to that. And that means that other ministers are going to have to pick up the slack if Keir Starmer and other prime ministers and presidents are really having to focus on this issue of European security.
And this finance issue that's being discussed at the moment is absolutely critical, because the Ukrainians are literally running out of money. They have been existing from the government services in Ukraine have been existing with funding from Europe and elsewhere over the last 3 years, and that I think it's Easter that runs out, and the only way to fill the gap, given the size of the gap, is to release these Russian assets on the basis that has been designed. So hopefully, when the Belgian Prime Minister, I believe, is coming to London today.
Yeah, today. But
hopefully, he's going to
agree
and stop being the roadblock to what is critical if the Ukrainians are going to get through the winter and into the spring.
But Catherine Philp, the Times World Affairs editor, was saying to us earlier on that there is a real view that maybe the US is eyeing that money up as some kind of deal with Ukraine to take some of those frozen Russian...
He's a dildo.
Exactly.
I mean, he's already had access to the minerals.
That would be a surprise.
Yeah.
And that could have implications as well.
Yeah. But it's just the lack of principle in the US approach to all this is absolutely shocking. And if you talk to any country, I was at the Doha Security Forum last weekend. I was in Romania at a security forum about 6 weeks ago. Talk to any of the countries around particularly the Eastern European border with Russia and Ukraine, and they are deeply concerned. I mean, even countries like Romania are talking about building up their defences.
Wow.
The Baltic states are absolutely, they've had direct experience of being run by the old Soviet Union and getting their freedom back, and they, and they understand the level of threat, and we need to be there for them, but we also need to be ready ourselves as well.
It's the efforts of Keir Starmer and the other European leaders to try and find a peace deal for Ukraine. This is the one thing that Keir Starmer is actually good at. He's got the Belgian Prime Minister here because, of course, Belgium, most of the Russian frozen assets are in Belgium, a bank called Euroclear, which is based in Belgium.
Yes, and they had a very successful meeting, a surprisingly successful meeting, Starmer and Merz and Macron, early in the week on this issue, because there was some doubt that they'd be able to come to an agreement amongst themselves. But it's clear that there is an appetite among European leaders to get this done, and it's the Belgians, for that reason, the reason you described, that all these assets are in one of their banks. Actually, 165 billion euros amounts to quite a lot of Belgium's GDP. And so Number 10 are insisting this meeting between the Prime Minister and the Belgian Prime Minister, long in the diary. It's meant to be talking about economic growth, etc., but I'm sure the main thing on the agenda will be these frozen assets. They're talking down chances of a big breakthrough. There won't be a press conference afterwards. We will probably get a diplomatic readout of the conversations, but it's a very, very important conversation.
It is, and I have some sympathy with the Belgian position. I have to say, be careful of unintended consequences. But we are increasingly feel like we are on a war footing. And let's listen to the warning from the NATO boss, Mark Rutte, who, of course, was the Dutch Prime Minister for many years. He spoke yesterday.
We are Russia's next target. And we are already in harm's way. When I became NATO Secretary General last year, I warned that what is happening in Ukraine could happen to allied countries too. That we had to shift to a wartime mindset.
Does the British government share that view, Patrick? Is the feeling when you talk to ministers that they are, they talk about growth and they get involved in these arguments about welfare reform and so on and so forth. So in many ways it's politics as usual. It doesn't feel like we're getting ready for war.
Well, if you speak to John Healey, the Defence Secretary, that's exactly the sort of thing he does say, that Britain needs to be ready for an invasion of the kind that Hitler threatened briefly in Operation Sea Lion, that we're not remotely prepared enough for war in Europe. But in the current sort of fiscal and political context, that's not necessarily a popular message either on Whitehall or with the public. But certainly there's an awareness in government that preparations needs to ramp up, that the industrial strategy of this government needs to have more to do with arms than anything else. They understand all of these things in theory, but the politics of it are not particularly straightforward. But I think we'll hear Keir Starmer probably broadly agree with Mark Rutte today, perhaps with a slightly less apocalyptic language. But, ministers have been out and about this morning basically saying, the UK needs to prepare for war, is on a war footing, because that's the world we now live in.